Get this party started. This is a joint hearing with the City of Madras and Jefferson County Planning Commissions. Nick is going to say a few words to introduce this meeting.
Thank you, Chair Vine. For the planning commissions and the public, this is a rather unusual meeting. So this is a joint meeting of both the City of Madras Planning Commission and the Jefferson County Planning Commission. As you'll see on the agenda this evening, we've got 4 agenda items, but the joint planning commission of both planning commissions will be meeting just for the first agenda item, the comprehensive plan amendment for the urban growth boundary expansion. That is to say that after that agenda item is finished, the planning commissioners can be excused unless you have nothing better to do. We'd love to have you stay. County planning commissioners can leave. We will go through both ex parte contact or conflicts of interest declarations for both commissions. Each commission will open the public meeting and so on and so forth. You individually take action as well. So for our planning county commissioners, you do have a microphone in front of you. If you hit the speak button, it turns red. If you don't do that, people in the audience won't hear you, and of course, people on Zoom won't hear you. So please, if you could just do that. I think that is about it from the technical side of things. Any questions before you proceed? Great, all yours.
All right, I am Melissa Irvin, Chair of the City of Madras Planning Commission. I am calling this meeting to order at 6:36 p.m. on September 18th. Nick, would you do a roll call, please?
Sure. Commissioner Reynolds.
Here.
Commissioner Kendall.
Here.
Commissioner Irvine.
Present.
Commissioner Etter is absent. The City Planning Commission has a quorum.
Thank you. Good evening. I am Jessica Locke, Chair of the Jefferson County Planning Commission. And Tanya, will you please do roll call?
Michelle Parcell here. Jeff Jordan is absent. Pete Bykart
Here.
Rich Brandwell here. Jessica Locke here. Lori Hancock
Here.
James Rock.
Here.
Planning Commission for County has one.
Thank you, Tanya. Okay, we are now going to open the public hearings for the City of Madras Comprehensive Plan Amendment for Large Lot Industrial UGB Amendment Proposal, file number PA 24-1. On the county side, the file number is 24-PA-01. This hearing is now open. All right, I'm going to read this very long statement, so you can tune me out if you'd like to. All right, this is the time and place set for hearing on planning file number. Okay, for PA 24-1, the hearing is now called to order. The hearing will proceed as follows. Staff will present the staff report. Applicant will present its application and supporting evidence. Any interested persons will then be provided the opportunity to present testimony or evidence in support that is neutral or that is in opposition. Applicant, as the party bearing the burden of proof, will then be afforded an opportunity to present rebuttal testimony. Staff will provide closing comments. Any party may request the written record remain open to respond to testimony presented at the hearing. At the conclusion of this hearing, the hearing's body may close the public hearing and deliberate toward the decision, close the public hearing and defer deliberations toward the decision at a date and time certain, or continue the public hearing at a date and time certain. All testimony, argument, and evidence must be directed to the applicable criteria or any other approval criteria you believe to be applicable. Matters unrelated to the application are not pertinent to the Planning Commission's decision in these proceedings. Failure on the part of any person to raise an issue with sufficient specificity to afford the planning commission and parties to this proceeding an opportunity to respond to the issue precludes appeal to the city council and land use board of appeals on that issue. Failure of the applicant to raise constitutional or other issues relating to conditions of approval with sufficient specificity to allow the local government or its designee to respond to the issue precludes an action for damages in circuit court. Commissioners must disclose any ex parte contacts, including site visits, biases, or conflicts of interest. Does any commissioner have anything to disclose? And if so, please state the nature of the same and whether you intend to participate in these proceedings. Anybody? I do not either. Does any party wish to challenge any member of the hearings body based on ex parte contacts, biases, or conflicts? All right. Now we'll move on to the counties, slightly shorter. Right? Thank you, Chairman. Do any county commissioners, county planning commissioners have an actual economic conflict of interest to disclose? No. Hearing none. So now we get to come to the fun part where staff gets to present. So we're opening the floor to Nick and Bethany.
All right, so we're gonna have a little bit longer staff report this evening. Both city and county planning directors will provide some remarks, as well as we have Beth Goodman from Equal Northwest. So we'll work our way through this. I think it's important for the commission to know this evening that this agenda item is related to the urban growth boundary amendment, which is an amendment to the city's comprehensive plan. Again, as I've noted earlier, there's two other agenda items on the agenda, but separate, but also related. It's the zone change and the annexation of the same property. Okay. Eco Northwest, Beth Goodman will have a presentation for you. She's going to go into a little more depth about how we came to the conclusion for the proposal this evening. And I'll let her speak to a lot of those details. I think it's important for the planning commissions to remember, I don't know if any of the commissioners were in their seats in 2016 when the city of Madras expanded our urban growth boundary for the large lot industrial site where Daimler is today. This is a unique program. It's a regional need. It's very different than a lot of other land needs in the state. We are able to replenish or bring in a second site because Daimler has occupied, developed that site fully. That's a 200-acre site. So under the program, you can expand your urban growth boundary for this need. Once that need is met through the land and then thereby developed under the program requirements, you can replenish or find a new site. So that's really what we're looking at today, is we're finding another 200-acre large lot industrial site to meet the city's, or I should say, regional need. There are certain requirements for this program, and that is explained in the findings there pretty well. But at this point, I'd like to just pass it off to Phil before any remarks, before we maybe have Beth go into her presentation.
Thanks, Nick. Phil Stenbeck with the County Planning Department. Excuse me. At this point, I want to read a few things into the record. The case file 24 PL1. The LCB notice was mailed on August 13th, 2024, 35 days. The 35-day notice is required by law. Neighbor notice went out on August 29th, 2024. Newspaper notices were published by the city on August 21st, 28th, and September 4th. The one that mentioned the applicable criteria for the county staff report are found on page 4, chapters 8 and 9 of the zoning ordinance and part 5 of the county comprehensive plan. And the reasoning why both commissions are here this evening is we have the city and the county urban growth management agreement that requires this particular participation. And I need to add one exhibit to the record, exhibit E for the county record, and that's a email we received from Central Oregon Land Watch this afternoon. So that exhibit E is now entered into the record. With that, that's my comments.
Thank you, Beth. We'll have you starting your presentation if that's okay.
Thank you very much for having me here. I'm Beth Goodman from Echo Northwest. And Bethany has my presentation up there. Thank you very much. Next slide, please. So what we're doing here is we are engaging with Central Oregon's Large Lot Industrial Program, which is a program that's unique in the state for the 3 counties of Central Oregon that allows an urban growth boundary to expand for large lot industrial uses. The program identified need for 6 sites, 3 sites that are between 50 and 100 acres, 2 sites that are between 100 to 200 acres, and then 1 site that's more than 200 acres. The program's been used twice, once by Madras for the Daimler site, and once by Redmond with their Department of Land site down near the airport. Next slide, please. So, in the application made jointly by the county and the city last year to Central Oregon COIC, pardon me, they proposed a 100 to 200 acre industrial site. Looking, and the proposal requires you say what site you're considering. So looking at a site that is county owned, it's about 198 acres, 4 parcels, one of which is very small. It's in North Madras, or just north of Madras. And future use would be traded sector industrial. All of that was included in the application to COIC for this project. On the next slide. Part of the process is looking at land within the Madras urban growth boundary. Where do you have industrial land, and do you have industrial land that meet this kind of need within the Madras or urban growth boundary? So what we're showing you here is all land that's zoned industrial, large lot industrial, which is the Daimler site, or airport development. Most of the industrial land is in the north part of Madras. There's a little bit in mixed use employment in the southern part of Madras that doesn't count. It's not the same. It's not large lot industrial. So we looked throughout the area for 100 acre sites. So sites that would be at least 100 acres. On the next slide, please. What we found is that there were no sites that were 100 acres where even if 2 sites were located next to each other with the same owner. We looked for that kind of thing. So contiguous ownership. And we didn't find any. What we found is some land that is vacant for current airport or future airport uses, your future wastewater treatment area, and then a lot of area that is developed for vacant and under 100 acres. So we started within the urban growth boundary and found no site. On the next slide. So as you're looking at a large lot industrial site, you have to think about what are the characteristics of the site that you need other than size of site. You know, the site is going to be between 100 and 200 acres. When we think of what kind of characteristics do we need to think about potential types of industries that may, not necessarily will, but may develop on that site. So in working with city and county staff, what we landed on was high tech and clean tech manufacturing, advanced manufacturing, and data centers. And you see some examples of these types of units there. So based on that, we started investigating what are the site needs of these kind of industries. And we've got some more specific information in the findings document that we won't go into in exhaustive detail here, but on the next slide. So the site needs for large lot industrial, a site that's, 100 to 200 acres, should be relatively rectilinear. So if you imagine a site that looks like a blob or an amoeba, that's not a great site for development for industrial uses. Because industrial uses just, it's not like housing where you have little bits scattered throughout the site. They need kind of big blocks of land. They need to be flat. Here we've identified a slope of 5% or less. And that is based on information from Business Oregon about the types of sites that businesses who are attracted to and locating in Oregon need for the 3 types of sites that we named above. So relatively flat, adjacent to the urban growth boundary, because you don't want a big old cherry stem and, you know, a lollipop of land at the end of it. That's not going to be good planning in any way. Either within one ownership, one lot, or multiple lots that are grouped together in common ownership. And the reason that ownership is important is that you imagine that you have, you've assembled a 150 acre site with 10 owners. You imagine trying to get 10 people to sell it to you at a price that made it affordable to develop industrial. I think you find it very difficult. So ownership is an important thing when you're considering these larger blocks of land. So it could be one parcel, it could be multiple parcels, as long as they're in common ownership. Compatibility with adjacent uses is an important consideration. You don't necessarily want to put large lot industrial right next to your residential. You don't want to have freight from that, for instance. You don't want freight going through your residential areas. Industrial can sometimes operate different hours. So overnight, for instance, it can be smelly, it can be noisy. So you want to make sure that you have compatibility with adjacent uses, depending on what you're doing. Available for sale. That's a really important one. So Madras has some larger industrial sites, not 100-acre sites, but larger industrial sites where the current owners they prefer not to sell. And of course, property owners get to decide if they're going to sell or not. And so through this process, we identified 15 different potential sites, and each property owner was sent a letter asking if they would like their land to be a candidate for the large lot industrial program, which would include selling the land at a price consistent with the real estate market. So maybe you want to sell your land at, do it at 100 times the real estate market. That's not what we're asking for. We're asking for, market rate prices. Access to highways, water, and sewer infrastructure are important. If it's going to be especially expensive to serve a site, that's something that we needed to know and be considered in this analysis, because of course, the city and the county, they don't want to bring in land that's going to be extraordinarily hard to develop because it's so far from your water, your sewer infrastructure, or because it has inappropriate effects on your highway system. And then access to electrical service, even though that electrical service isn't a city or county service, we can see that as well. So if you go on to the next slide. So we looked all around the urban growth boundary and we identified 15 different sites that met all of most of those factors. The one that we didn't take into consideration at this initial stage was whether land was available for sale. Took that into account at the next stage. So for instance, you have Madras has a rather large urban reserve. Areas in urban reserve are the first priority for bringing into an urban growth boundary. So areas 5 and 6 are in urban reserve areas. They're obviously both of them very big. There's a lot of land there in common ownership. But you can see from the hash marks on this map that it's very slopey there. And so it's all or mostly all over 5% slope. You can't find an area there that is contiguous with 100, 200 acres on it. So we looked at all of the different lands that were around the urban growth boundary and we eliminated some of them based on site needs. And what I'll say is we looked at all of the areas that were 100+ acres in common ownership. So we didn't look at small pieces of land. So obviously that's not meeting the site needs. So sites 5 and 6 were eliminated because of steep slopes. And then there were a number of sites that were interesting where you have a main area and it's divided from that main area by something like a railroad or a road or some other type of constraint, like a floodplain or some other constraint. And that led to elimination of site 3, which is also a very odd shape, but it's got a lot of constrained area and it's got a little area that's not adjacent to the rest of the parcel. Site 11, site 12, and site 14. So all of those drop out, and in some cases, I didn't really mention that we looked at other constraints, like floodplain and floodway, as well as very high landslide hazards. Areas that if they were 100 acres, but then there was a bunch of it that was constrained by one of those constraints, those are consideration as well. So on the next slide, please. So then we came down to this handful of parcels. Here we've listed the acreage that are contiguous acreage and unconstrained acres. And it was at this point that the county and the city sent out letters to the landowners assessing whether they were interested in being considered to be brought into the urban growth boundary. And all of the landowners identified that they were not interested, except for the owners of area 9 and 8. Those are our county-owned lands. So should I pause and take any questions before I go to the last part of this presentation? Okay, looks like there's no questions. All right, next slide, please. So for all of those sites, we went through what are called the Goal 14 factors, which are required in doing an urban growth boundary expansion. You have to consider these factors. So factor 1 was that the site should have sufficient accommodation of identified land needs. So ability to meet the site needs that we showed on a few slides ago, availability of land for sale, and for industrial development, and potential integration into the existing city. So an area, could you go back to the last slide for a moment? An area like number 7, for instance, that's adjacent to a residential area, as is area 4, as well as being further away from the industrial areas. Those are factors that we considered, and the owners of those sites were not interested in having that land for sale. So if we go on to the next slide again. Sites where the landowner was not interested in having their land brought in, those all, when we come down to how we scored it, those all resulted in a negative score because they weren't meeting the identified criteria. And then we got to consider orderly and economic provision of public facilities and services. So we worked with city staff and public works staff closely on this, looking at the relative costs of providing transportation, water, and sanitary sewer service to each site. I've been evaluated the advantages and disadvantages and relative costs, roughly speaking, for service into each site. Because you don't want to bring in a site that is going to be the highest cost of service, for instance. That's just not a good idea for the city in the future. And we also had some transportation analysis done, which fed into this analysis about the potential impact of the type of development we're talking about on different sites. So on the next slide, please. Then you get this interesting criteria of comparative environmental, energy, economic, and social consequences. So we're looking at considerations related to those factors. And looking at what's going on each site and how it relates to the existing city. So for instance, an industrial area that's adjacent to residential would have negative social consequences potentially. If you had an area, which I don't believe we did, that had very high quality natural resources on it or habitat on it, that would have negative environmental impacts. And then factor 4 is compatibility of the proposed urban use with nearby agricultural activities. And so what we looked at is what's going on around the sites in terms of agriculture, trying to look for the sites that would negatively impact agricultural uses least. And industrial sites, other than the fact that let us presume that it's not a polluting industrial use, which none of the uses we're looking at are high polluting. Industrial uses generally have less impact, off-site. They aren't bothered by the fact that sometimes agriculture is smelly or, has dust or other things that, maybe residential areas are negatively impacted with agriculture and so are, have some compatibility issues. So in the next slide, what we did is we, took all of these things together, and looked at the impact on all of these. Area 9, which is the area that we started with, had the highest positive impact in terms of land use efficiency based on where it's located relative to the UGB and the fact that the landowner, the county is willing to sell it. Looking at costs of services, the costs of services on a lot of these things were, you know, when you look at water service or wastewater service or transportation services, one of those on each of these was high. On a few of these, one of those was low. Otherwise, it was moderate to high. So the problem with infrastructure is that it's expensive. And then potential impact on nearby agriculture uses. That was mostly neutral. Area 2 was adjacent to it. Its shape could have left an agricultural area sort of stranded between the within the UGB almost. So that's how we came to the conclusion that area 9 was the appropriate one to look at for UGB expansion. Go to the next slide, please. And here's just a summary of that. Area 9, we've got it circled in pink, big old arrow pointed to it. Its size, shape, and proximity to Madras, the Madras industrial area, were things in its favor. The owner is willing to have the land developed for large land industrial use. Presumably, I think the county is planning on eventually selling it. Low cost of sanitary sewer, moderate cost of transportation, and higher cost of water service, as well as power. It was one of the 2 best sites with positive opportunities for economic, social, energy, and environmental consequences. And it was neutral on the adjacent agricultural uses. So what we really did is we really focused down on which of these sites would have least impact to your adjacent agricultural uses or to agriculture uses if there were those going on the site where, especially where the landowner wanted to continue doing those agricultural uses. So we were really thinking about that a lot as we went through all of this. And I think that is, I guess we've got one more slide. This pertains more to your next 2 hearings. So Madras needs, if this site is brought into the UGB, Madras needs to work with Jefferson County to ensure that the site serves with infrastructure per the industrial site readiness plan that you have, and execute an annexation agreement. And then there's a limitation to the number of transportation trips to the site or from the site until a specific use is known and additional transportation planning completed. I will mention that it's going to take some time to do that servicing with infrastructure, the planning for it, getting it built, identifying the user, that kind of thing. You can't really start any of that until it's in the urban growth boundary. Nick, was there anything else you wanted me to mention at this point?
I think that pretty well covers it. No, there'll be, we're getting into the public questions for the planning commissioners, but we will soon be going into public testimony. We will ask for public comments. Thank you. Questions for the planning commissioners? All right.
I prefer Madras Planning Commission. I did have a question regarding the relative cost of infrastructure development, how you came to a conclusion that the sanitary services for slot 9 was considered low on your grading scale. And like for instance, slot or sub area 2 was considered item moderate, even though, I mean, it borders already industrialized land. Whereas 9 is in the corner of the city limits and outside city limits and outside the UGP. Questioning how that low scale came, or how that gradient came to be.
I'll go ahead and take that. The sanitary sewer component for site 2, I'm gonna just pull that up from the findings.
That's when the issue was six, so I think
So for site 2, we rated the sanitary sewer as moderate because there's a potential for the upsizing of the existing cherry sewer line that runs east-west. So you can directly flow into the site, so it's a gravity sewer. But the trunk line that serves that site that goes east and west across the highway and then goes into the Deemer pump station, you may need to upsize that. Site 9 had low because you can likely gravity flow into it. The site's directly adjacent to the plant. And you can directly pipe into the plant as we have with Diamond. So the distance for the connection is also really short as well.
So it comes to existing infrastructure probably there.
Yes, exactly.
This is Commissioner Urban, on one of the, study, matrix guides, it also talks about electrical service, and I didn't see that specifically mentioned here.
should I discuss that a little bit?
Go ahead and I can fill in if needed.
So electrical service is something that's going to be an issue equally bad for all of the sites. We talked with the power company, with Save Power. I always confuse that with BGE, because I'm not a customer either. And I've been working around the state on similar sorts of projects, and what we hear all around the state is desire for a lot more power and not enough power right now. So your electrical companies all around the state are planning for bringing more power in, so they're working on different projects. That's going to take some years to work through. That's not a year or two sort of thing. So we didn't dive deeply into electrical power, but we did consider it, and it's the same sort of problem everywhere.
Thank you.
Clifford rounds again. So another question or item that was brought up was market price, that if to participate in this large lot expansion, basically the seller would have to agree to a market price or somewhat of, what is the market price or that you suggested?
We didn't suggest a specific market price, we talked about the concept of market price, and that's a letter that county staff I will have more input on. The letters are included in the packet for the findings. But we didn't specify what the market price would be, but the concept of being willing to sell at market price.
So the owner would have to agree to market price prior to being in this large lot expansion.
Yep, that's correct, Commissioner. So part of the analysis, part of the Central Oregon Regional Large Lot Industrial Program requirements are, one, you have to have a willing property owner that wants to be part of the program. Part of that requirement is their willingness to sell the land at a reasonable market price for 10 years. And the reason for that is that there's lots of examples out there of people wanting their lands to be brought into urban growth boundary. And then once it's brought into urban growth boundary, of course, zoned and annexed, then they want a much higher price than market. This regional need is intended to meet a shorter term need within the next 10 years. So part of the criteria or requirements of the program is a willing property owner to sell their land at a market price. They also agree not to subdivide that to parcels less than 50 acres. And there's other requirements to go on with that, including limit the uses to industrial uses. In other words, there will be no residential or other uses on this property but industrial. They have to agree to all of that. So when we talk about the market price, it's not necessarily what they're asking today. It's okay, for the next 10 years, are you going to be willing to offer your land up reasonable market price so that this land is reasonably available, so that we don't have the problem we've had in the past, which is you get brought in the urban growth boundary and then you want an exorbitant price and therefore it's not reasonably available for development and therefore not meeting the regional need. So that it's really more of a higher level kind of requirement than what is the price.
That's happened in the past.
I actually, yeah.
Go ahead, Cliff, you had a question?
I just said that you referred to something that's happened in the past.
Yes,
Okay.
and that is the problem by which the Central Oregon Regional Large Lot Needs Analysis was created in 2012. And the cities in Central Oregon all agreed, and as well as DLCD, Thousand Friends of Oregon, and others agreed that there were problems with the existing Goal 9 requirements, and therefore cities did not have adequate large industrial sites to market or recruit industry into Central Oregon. And part of that was you had property owners that weren't willing to sell or selling at a reasonable rate. And there was also problems of people bringing land into UGB for employment purposes or industrial purposes, and then subdividing that land out, and therefore not allowing needed industry to be located there. So these were the problems that this needs analysis was seeking to resolve, and that's why they're program requirements. And so when we go through this analysis, it's part of our selection criteria for finding the site.
And all acreage has to be contiguous, it all has to be connected, it can't be 150 or 100 acres in one spot and 100 acres in another spot, it all has to be in
Correct.
one spot.
Under the program. Again, this is for large industry. And so I think one of the examples that hopefully most of us know very well is Daimler's High Desert Proving Grounds is the perfect case. They have a 200-acre lease with the city. So they have about a 40,000 square foot industrial building and then massive amounts of track that they test their trucks and vehicles and different platforms on. So if you have just a 100-acre site, that doesn't work for Daimler or the industry that you're attracting. So that's why the contiguous land of over 100 to 200 acres is so important, that you can attract those large industries or large development that you otherwise wouldn't be able to do.
How big is the footprint for Daimler?
They have a 200+ acre lease with the city.
So to add on and to answer your question about exactly what does market price mean, one of the Oregon administrative rules that guides this says methods for determining lack of availability of land include a site that's listed at more than 150% of fair market values. So it's not an exact price, but looking at an owner who has expectations that are very much off the market. So that's the there's some amount of wiggle room here. We're not talking about a single market price, but even a little above market, but rather than a whole lot above market.
Yeah, usually there's comps or something, some kind of comparable, that you can base that market price off of.
Yes, and we weren't doing that kind of analysis here. We were assessing whether owners were interested in having their land considered. And one of the factors that was required was willingness to sell at market prices.
Okay, and they would be tied to that for 10 years, and if that no action happened in that 10 years.
They would be tied to an agreement with the city about development of the site, and it has a lot more to do with things other than what price would you sell.
Okay. Cool.
I have a clarification question. These are all things that you've been discussing that the owners in agreement with the city to stay within those parameters. This parcel, I'm understanding, is owned by the county. Is that correct?
That is correct.
Do we already have an agreement in place that the county, because they are the owners, that, it's been worked out and that platform's in, so that when we get ready to make a decision, we know that we have the owner cooperation.
That is correct. So the county has affirmed that they're willing to sell the land at a reasonable market price for 10 years, not subdivide the land under 50 acres, use it only for industrial land, just as all the other candidate site property owners were asked, right? And they have affirmed that they will follow the program's guidelines.
Will they continue if it's incorporated into the urban growth boundary? Who then becomes the owner?
The county would retain ownership. The county has discussed that they will not be building any buildings, that they're likely going to sell that land to a developer, presumably a business that will build their development on it.
But then we will need the city, out of the city, fit into having the benefit of having it in the urban growth.
Well, part of that would be when the site is annexed, which you'll consider later this evening, then it becomes part of the city's tax base as well as the county's tax base, and you have the benefit from the employment as well.
With the developer.
Yes.
With the developer that's put on that, not anything to do with the owner.
Correct.
Okay.
Yep.
Thank you.
So when you get a lease, like I'm leasing this ground, what, I mean, what length are we talking about? I mean, cause there's any chance, I mean, when you say lease, I mean, if Daimler pulls out, then we have another large lot just sitting there. I'm just wondering what terms we're looking at on these leases.
I don't recall exactly the term of Daimler's lease. I believe it's a 20-year lease with 3 10-year extensions that can be exercised upon mutual agreement. So it's in effect, if all options are exercised, it's a 50-year lease.
Okay. And this new side would be similar, I would assume.
Actually not. The reason why Daimler is a lease is because that is land that's subject to the FAA requirements the city owns. We hold that in trust for the federal government. We are not allowed to sell land, but we can lease the land, and we use that lease revenue for the benefit of the airport. That's why they don't want us to sell it. So we use that lease revenue to help fund the airport. The land that you're talking about, Site 9, is not part of the Madras Airport. It does not have the FAA restrictions, so therefore, should the county want to, they can sell it to a developer.
Got it.
Any other questions? Commissioner Locke, back to the electrical, question. Just a little bit further clarification on that. I was recalling at the December meeting when we last met and discussed it, that it was indicated that that lot was not desirable from infrastructure, that it could potentially be very expensive to, especially on the electrical aspect of that. And so has that changed?
Unfortunately, it's not. Site 9 is located within the Central Electric territory, right? And so all the other sites are within the Pacific Power territory, except for, Site 8. So unfortunately, the power situation has not changed. We hear from Pacific Power that they are currently working on transmission and distribution system upgrades with the BPA, and that those are likely to be online in 5 to 10 years. So again, I think the point here is that while you may want a data center, the availability and the amount of power available is probably the greatest limiting factor there. What we're assuming in this analysis is that that's a problem for all of the sites. So it's not necessarily a distinguishing character. And therefore, it's not tipping the scale or directing us to favor one site or another.
Thank you. One more, in that area, other than water, sewer, and electrical, was also highways. And I know we've, both, commissions have had, discussion over the Madras, South Area refinement plan. And, so then highways would be involved for industrial, on the north end here. And I know ODOT doesn't really get too excited about more traffic hitting, different points. So if you're bringing trucks in and out, would they be coming in and out on that, which Dogwood? And, is there kind of any kind of a tentative plan of what that might look like? Or are we looking at another 5 to 10 years out? Because we're waiting on having enough electrical to handle putting in all of that.
Great question. So I'll first start by saying we don't know the exact use of the site. We are required to analyze the impact of the transportation system, both city, county, and state facilities. That is included in the transportation planning rule analysis that's in your packet. Kilson Associates prepared that. They also coordinated the preparation and review of that with Oregon Department of Transportation Region 4. In that analysis, we're assuming that development for Site 9 would impact both the 26 and Dogwood and 26 and Cherry intersections. So because we do not know the use, and ODOT had concern for that, they requested that we impose a trip cap. And that's why at the end of Beth's presentation, it was noted that there's a 400 trip cap on the development. So because we don't know it, we're putting a ceiling on how many vehicles can go in and out. So when we presumably develop the site, we will make sure that it's within a trip cap. Operationally speaking, before you ever have that, the city is or will start on our industrial site readiness plan. That is an infrastructure plan just for the industrial area, including the airport. One component of that is transportation. We will analyze what improvements are needed to be made to Dogwood and both Cherry Lane in anticipation of development of this site and land already in the urban growth boundary as well. So we'll know what improvements are needed and when. The third component is the annexation agreement. The City Planning Commission will consider later this evening that the county and the city have tentatively agreed to the terms, says that the property owner and or developer will be responsible for making all infrastructure improvements prior to the issuance of building permit for CMO, I believe. So at this point in time, we don't know the use, but we have a trip cap. We are going to have an infrastructure plan that will flush out what actual infrastructure improvements are needed to Cherry and Dogwood, much less any other facility later to be found to be impacted. There may be other facilities. Then the annexation agreement upon development says transportation and other infrastructure will need to be improved prior to certificate of occupancy. So in planning terms, this is where you have concurrency, where you will have a site that gets developed and you have the necessary infrastructure available and ready to serve that upon development.
Questions of staff. Now we are looking next to applicant testimony. Is that correct? Is there any?
Yes.
people proposing it. So it should be the city. So public comment will come into play when we get to proponent, neutral, and opponent testimonies.
Chair Irvine, the county has requested the city make this amendment, so staff is viewing the Jefferson County as the applicant. for
Right.
this. So,
Jefferson County is the applicant making a presentation in this area now.
Well, thank you, Commissioners, for having us. I'm Wayne Forty, the County Commissioner, and we've been working on investing in industrial properties since 2017. And a lot of the reasons that you heard tonight, we have property, there's like a ghost inventory, costs are too high. And we watched other neighboring counties do successful projects. I came from County, some data centers up in the Dalles, that were able to secure property from the port. Facebook and Apple, they were able to secure their properties from the county or triangle. So we just started looking at things, and when the properties came up, this is where we landed. So we are, of course, in favor of the application. Got some other facts here too.
And just, the handout in front of you is just a little bit of the history, why you wouldn't normally hear this from a property owner. It is public property, so we wanted to kind of get more of a history of the process the county's gone over through the years. I would point out that stat on the first page, can rely a little bit on traffic. Because the stats from, according to the most recent US Census Bureau on map data, nearly 70% of workers living in Jefferson County, 2021, commuted outside of the county to work. And so this is, has some potential to keep those folks local and off the highway. But from a process standpoint, when you all met back in December, as earlier that day, city counties meeting, county commissioners in the city talked about the same update, and the county at that time said, as we continue to go through this process, if any of the property owners that are also eligible want to come in, that the county commissioners committed at that time, they would step back. So part of the process was county property is eligible, let's start this long process, then we'll for a year and a half. And if there's other private property that is eligible and can come in, wants to do this, the county's committed to step back. So I think that's important to know. We're not trying to, the county is not trying to cut line in front of anybody. Some talk a bit about the funding of the property. That's on page 2. That came from some savings from the courthouse across the street from us. And the county looked at with that debt payment, we didn't want to encourage any windfall spending. So the county continued to look at ways to invest in an asset similar to what we do with investments in cash, by bonds, by corporate notes. At that point, the county was willing to look at a concept of buying land, be available for the future benefit of the community, to not necessarily have an expectation of profiteering off land, but find out what would be best for the port or what we would be at this point. Part of that purchase started in 2017. The capital debt reserve fund that was created in the county budgetary process. Very transparent on page 60 of the proposed budget. We found that the Hippie Joe piece, kind of on page 3, we're trying to read everything, where it became available. At that point, the county was able to secure that land using economic development funds. That's funding that comes to each county based on population and how much people spend or likely lose in video poker. Also that year in the county audit, we identified that there's additions to capital assets, including purchases of land held for future development. It's in our audit finding in the management discussion on page 11. As we continued, after Hippie Joe, the public, topic was, should the county look at two corners of the zigzags surrounding the airport? And in 2017, we were able then to secure a land by Mr. Herman, and then in 18, Jared. We tried to continue the trend with Cal Farms, we couldn't agree on price. Tried again in 2019, couldn't agree on price. And then in the winter or last part of calendar year 2022, we had some discussion. There was still a desire to try and talk about price again. It was, we closed on the property February 23. If you were to look at the map, there's 3 parcels. The Cal Farms is the one that connects everything. So we didn't have the Cal Farms, or would be a contiguous ownership. And so that last piece was kind of in real estate world, a little bit of location. So we were able to finally secure that, took several years. So without trying to rush into anything. And that made us eligible for the large lot process that we're here today. On page 5, it's kind of the start of a list of, it's not including all of the meetings, but there have been several public meetings with public bodies on the agenda. This topic has been talked about city and county and the public involved. And that's all I have. I would just like to point out, since we're trying to do something on the record, that Commissioner Simmerling is here. I don't know. Yeah, the next step is the Novo, isn't it? Just in case for some reason Chair Reporting is not able to attend, or meeting still is, so he able to step in.
For a while, thanks.
Are there any questions for the applicants?
Yeah. Hi. I had a question. So you purchased the farmland. What is farmland per acre average? Do you know what the average price of usable farmland per acre is at this time?
I don't know, I can tell you that the good holdings that the county has, 389 acres, we have a total purchase price of 1.76. That's an average of $4,517 per acre. I would point out that 3 of those lots have dwellings on them that increase substantially the value of the farmland itself, and also the location of all the parcels attached. City limits.
So what are your plans for those 3 dwellings?
Those 3 what?
The 3 houses.
The 3 dwellings, will
Yeah.
continue to use those as their tenant for dwellings
Okay.
until the property sells.
And
No desire to move the house until the marketplace is ready for development.
Same with the water, right now, some of that property is leased to, as farm ground, and I think most of the water is going elsewhere, but that water will stay with the ag.
okay.
And I know, and counties will work with North Unit any way they want to use that water, but, if they have a way that they'd like it to be done, or
So will it be required that the dwelling to be rented out? If it's brought in the city limit?
Correct, yeah, we
Okay.
continue to get dwellings will get there, and then farmland will continue to be used as farmland.
Okay. And then,
Serve as much to be idle. The 3 we're talking about, the other piece, the Hippie Joe piece, does not have water on it, so it is sitting idle.
okay, and then, I guess, I understand, if I'm correct, county does not pay property taxes.
That is not, that is true if we are using it for public purposes.
Okay.
So the 3 pieces that we have leased out are paying property tax at the same rate it would be in the private ownership, so.
Now, will they'll be paying at the, farm use rate, not at the industrial zone?
My understanding, you have to talk to the assessor, but I believe anytime with the city that property is brought in, farmland is brought into the UGB or the city limit, as long as you continue to do farm practices, you are continuing to be taxed at the farm as if it was outside, not so.
Okay. Correct, yeah.
Uh, you had some great questions, with the, Commissioner. For the record. EFU ground, when it's taken out of EFU, there's typically like 7 years back that have to be paid. Would that be applicable to that ground as well?
I don't know why, I don't think we have any special exemption. Public. It won't be the county to make that decision, state law.
Sure.
Yeah.
Sure. I believe that what you're alluding to is applicable to non-farm dwellings. I don't know that it's applicable in this situation.
Okay, I thought it was all EFU ground if it changed.
It could be, I do know that it is applicable to non-farm dwellings.
Okay. Thank you.
The Rocky Mountain Club and Speedway, are they going to be adverse on each other?
That, those operations are on city land, on airport land. So other than being a neighbor,
And, the lease ground there, and of course, we don't know what the use is there. Could be on this piece of property if it does get involved. But, I think that's part of the application that be that. Got a certain number of trips, so you know, you can't too much traffic long like. It's a big deal. That procedure. Give those changes.
Any other questions for the applicant? Great, thank you. I have another statement to read next. So we will now receive a public testimony. When you testify, please state your name and address for the record. Make sure that you are seated at the podium up here and that your microphone is turned on. They might already be turned on, but it is helpful if you talk next to the microphone as opposed to way back here. If you want people to hear you, please speak into the microphone. All testimony shall be directed to the planning commission and not to the applicant, staff, or other members of the audience. If you have a question for another party, please direct your question to the planning commission chair, to her or either one of us, and we will determine whether a response from the other party is appropriate. Please keep your testimony concise and relevant to the issues before us this evening. It is perfectly acceptable and encouraged to indicate that you agree with the points made by another party instead of reiterating the point. Testimony will be received in the following order. Persons speaking in support of the application. Next, persons who wish to provide neutral testimony. Next, persons who wish to provide opposition testimony. Finally, we will hear rebuttal argument from the applicant to the testimony provided. We may have a lot of people speaking here tonight. If discussion or comments get very lengthy, we may instill the time cap of 3 to 5 minutes. So we will give you a warning, and then you will just need to make sure that you try and wrap up your comments within that time period. All right, so we are going to open up our public testimony. Who would like to testify in support of the applicant? Any testimony in support? Is there anyone who would like to provide neutral testimony? Go ahead. Again, please make sure you're seated in front of the microphone with your name and your address.
Good evening, my name is Josh Bailey, General Manager, North Kennedy Irrigation District, 2024 Northwest Beach Street, Madras, Oregon. One of the things I hadn't heard this evening during the Eco Northwest report is talk about the existing irrigation infrastructure on this property. North Unit has submitted comments on the proposed annexation. However, I did want to highlight just a few items for the record. Number one, any development of these properties would and will potentially impact existing federal facilities that are managed by North Unit Irrigation District. And any improvements on the property would have to, the water rights would have to be removed and permanently transferred off before any development could take place. And then we would also ask that the existing irrigation infrastructure, which is currently a canal, would either be protected, relocated, or piped at the developer's expense. And in addition to that, we would request the section 4 of the annexation agreement. We propose some additional verbiage for the board's consideration. And there are existing Deschutes River water rights on the property and Crooked River water rights on the property. That is all I have. And again, these comments were submitted originally with we submitted comments earlier. I'm just kind of reiterating them here for that case.
Thank you.
There, did I mention one thing? So just for the record, exhibit D of the county staff report has an NUID letter in it. So that's considered in the staff report.
Good evening, I'm Gary Harris, 7,000 Northwest Native Madras. And at this point, I want to remain neutral in my testimony. That's why I'm here now. This is a big decision, and you guys are all here tonight to make that decision. I have a question for Nick. Is they going to make the decision tonight unless this record's kept open?
Staff is asking,
Subsequent hearing going to be taking place.
they are being asked to take formal action to make a recommendation for the city planning commission to the city council and the county commission.
Who makes the decision, city council or city planning or county planning and city together?
They both need to make a decision, Gary.
Both need to make.
They will make a recommendation to the city council and board of commissioners respectively.
I've been a farmer here for 56 years and I've always been really protective of agricultural ground. And it saddens me that Echo Northwest looked at many parcels that I consider good farmland. And it's too far north into the agency plains agricultural ground to make me happy. The land was with irrigation is high value farmland. And I understand the county's need to want to create a 200-acre site. My second question for Nick is, are we only looking for one 200-acre site? Or are we looking for all lands that will qualify as large scale industrial?
Under the program requirements, we are only allowed to find one site that's between 100 and 200 acres.
One site between 100 and 200 acres. Okay, good. I think at this time, I agree with the county and the reason that they wanted to buy that land. But I think they're premature in asking that the sign on dog would come in now when we've got other sites that would meet that category. I'm upset that we overlooked site 4, Kitty Joe's land. I'm upset that we didn't look at 8, 13, and 14. I apologize that I haven't read the 500 pages and I'm learning as we go tonight. And I'm still upset that why Echo Northwest would, ignore site 4, which is the land downtown, which is in urban plan housing service. That landowner will never be given housing.
And if you told him he could all be large scale industrial, I'm sure he might opt to do that today. But I can't speak for that landowner. I'm also upset that if you want to talk about power and water availability, you need to look east towards the prison. And that's when Northwest didn't identify any properties down Ashfield Lane. I would request that the record remain open for the 15 days for further comment. And I want to remind everybody that Daimler was on leased land, is that correct? So what was wrong with looking the railroad dependent land where supposedly the city wants to put the racetrack? Why wasn't that parcel considered as large landlocked, large scale industrial potential? It's on the airport, it's leased land, but it should have been included in this process in my mind. The one thing that I want all the plants commissioners, and you guys do great jobs, to be mindful of House ORS 215-296, which is the farm impact test. And I'll read it to you. It requires local government to find that this proposal will not force significant change in accepted farm and forest practices or surrounding lands devoted to farm and forest. And that this application will not increase the cost of accepted farm and forest practices on surrounding lands devoted to farm and forest. So if we give this large scale industrial to the county, it has to be locked in solid tight, that it's only going to be large scale uses. I can foresee 20 years down the road, somebody wanting to parcelize it into something else. So it has to remain large scale industrial. And they have that insurance in it, that it's that way. And with that, I think I've covered everything I wanted to talk to you about, and thank you for the opportunity. Any questions?
Thank you. Yes, so in neutral testimony,
Yes, ma'am. Members of the commission, I'm John Stark. I am the CEO of Economic Development for Central Oregon. I've got a few slides for you tonight, but I'll mainly focus on slides 5 through 8 in order to keep my testimony within the 3 to 5 minutes that you've asked for. But our work in economic development is really centered around helping companies move, start, really get to advance the slide. And so we work within industry, specifically the trade sector, which is the industry that's been identified for this large lot industrial. And we work with kind of companies one at a time to help them scale and grow here on the high desert. We often recruit large scale industry and small businesses to the high desert area. Next slide, please. We're focused on really 5 different industries. You'll see advanced manufacturing there. You'll see technology. So those fit right into the identified industries that Eco Northwest has talked about. And we've had 40 plus years experience in doing this work. Next slide, please. We get involved in table setting, so creating an environment that industry can grow in. We've been behind some very large scale projects. We help change the landscape and create jobs for families here on the high desert. You'll see there bullet point 3, we get involved in industrial land development. So we have an environment so these companies can locate. We also get involved in air service development and infrastructure. So we have vast knowledge of power, water, sewer, utilities, and what's needed to develop industrial lands. Next slide, please. This LOI process we were involved in 2012, the creation and the RUA that identified a regional and frankly statewide need that created this LOI process, and it's managed by COIC. We helped some of the larger companies, you can see on the right hand side here, expand and grow in the area. The reason this LOI process works is because one, it is a very strategic process that's laser focused on trade sector, large lot, industrial development. It's also an opportunity for us to respond to statewide leads that come from Business Oregon, from out-of-state interest, which many of those companies are out-of-state interest, and also those that have started here and grown to a point where they need larger lands. Most of these companies were less than 10 employees at some point in Central Oregon. If you add up the total employment for these firms, you're going to be in the thousands. And so these companies now, different than even 10 years ago when we started this program, will have needs for larger lots going ahead, meaning the industry we have on the high desert here will need larger lands than they needed 10 years ago. And that's one of the reasons why this large lot process is so important. There are limited choices for large lots across the state. It's specifically targeted use to attract industrial users. And then more importantly, it was talked about who should hold this land. How do we prevent this from being broken up into smaller parcels? We found that having this in public ownership creates a long-term opportunity that that land can be held and not parsed off to meet certain market conditions. And because of the applicant's interest in trying to make this available long-term, meeting market conditions down the road, it's an optimal landowner for this particular application. So really what I'm hoping to do in my next couple of slides is identify what the demand is for larger parcels and then what we have for supply. And then to talk just briefly about the economic opportunities that exist. Should this land be brought into the UGB and should it be rezoned to industrial? Next slide, please.
You're at about 4 minutes right now.
Okay, great. So this is large lot absorption in the central Oregon area over the last 15 years. 1,075 acres have been absorbed in these communities. And it's been absorbed by data centers, R&D, and manufacturing. Next slide, please. This is the demand. Through our work with Business Oregon, there's been over 53 private sector requests in the 2 to 10 acre up to the 101 plus acre. You'll see over the last year and a half to 2 years, we've seen demand for 2 to 10 acres, 11 to 50, and a large number of requests in that 50 to 100 acres and 100 plus. So our hope is that we would now have a land that we can promote here in Jefferson County to create jobs. Next slide. These are the sites that are available. You'll notice that presently we do have a 70 acre site that's privately owned. They have ambitious prices. They're not meeting market price. The fact that this land would be publicly held allows it for opportunities to be held for that longer term purpose. There are lands in other communities, but presently Madras does not have a for sale lot larger than 10 acres. It has leased land, but non-aeronautical uses aren't looking for leased land. There are certain projects that might take a look at it, such as Daimler, but generally speaking, none of the companies that I showed you before would look at a leased piece of property. They want that asset to perform for their bottom line. Last slide, please. And then finally, this is the industry mix that we have here on the high desert. And this is the manufacturing growth on the left that we've seen over a 10-year time span. There's a tremendous opportunity for Madras to be in this game of growth in manufacturing, but also help support the existing businesses that are here in Madras. So I'll conclude with the fact that there's tremendous opportunity should this be brought in, and we're ready and willing to be here to help promote it. And I think it's got the right ownership and it's got the right opportunity and proximity to infrastructure. Those other lands just don't pencil. And Eco Northwest has done an analysis to validate that. So thank you for letting me stretch that a bit more. Appreciate it.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Sure.
Scott, could you tell us about how does the energy efficiency have an impact on our ability to develop this land for industrial use?
Yeah, great question. So as Eco Northwest and Beth pointed out, this is a problem across the country. Frankly, artificial intelligence is drawing significant attention, and it's even more than what the data industry had before. So this is a problem that's US wide. Our utility partner, as Nick had mentioned, is investing hundreds of millions of dollars to bring additional power over the next 10 years through a new 500 kV line to the area. And BPA also has a strategy to offload power off the dams to that transmission provider over the next 10 years. So there's more power coming. It's not readily available for a data center tomorrow, but it's coming. There are other uses that aren't using power of data centers, 2 to 10 megawatts that can be served today. And so there are some opportunities with the uses that you have that could be served on a smaller scale that aren't data center load factors. Other question before I prematurely leave?
Commissioner Campbell, if I heard you correct, you said that based on the research that the company did on the analysis for the property that lots 4, 8, 13, and 14 would not work well for what we were doing. Just taking into account the was asking why these others were considered, and you have done the analysis to where these businesses would have to as well as those other lots.
I was speaking mainly to the airport property being leased land. Generally speaking, non-aeronautical uses aren't interested in lease-only land. We've tried to put them on lease-only land before. There's only a small set. We can find ways to make that perform as an asset. Why? Because you can only get 50 years and you can't transfer that asset within that time. So when changing economics happen with the business, that asset can't be transferred. And so some businesses will, like Daimler, that's a long-term investment. I think Nick mentioned 20 years plus some extensions. But at the end of the day, those companies that I show are all on purchase dirt.
And you're saying that lots 4, 8, 13, and 14 would be lease only?
No, so there are other lots that were analyzed that could be brought in that are privately owned. And I think those questions were resolved in the analysis that Eco Northwest did. One, because of slope, two, because of proximity to infrastructure. That's the rationale that was provided that showed that lot 9 was the ideal property. But I'll add that optimally it's publicly held, so it creates some performance opportunities for sale and long-term hold in order to meet future market demands instead of these shorter term needs.
If needed.
The lot 8 is also publicly held.
Yeah, and I think that the analysis, and I'll defer to Beth as to specifically why lot 8 wasn't ideal.
So, speaking to lot, 4 and 13, those, are privately owned and the owners weren't interested in participating in the program, so they wouldn't be considered available. Site 14, once you take out constraints, is smaller than 100 acres. And then site 8, has higher costs for infrastructure and, it's divided, so it's a smaller site. And you can't develop the whole site as one site. It's also further from Highway 26.
How many acres is it?
When it comes down to it, you can develop 150 or fewer acres of that site. So it's a smaller site. And the entire site could not be developed because of that.
I need to enter 2 exhibits into the record. One is Exhibit F, which was introduced earlier by the county as a part of their presentation. And then Mr. Stark's Exhibit G will be this PowerPoint presentation.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay. Any more neutral testimony? Okay, we will move on to opposition testimony.
For the record, I'm Nikki Killingsworth, Secretary Treasurer, Jefferson County Farm Bureau. We are opposed to this process. You can see a lot of people have turned out tonight, commissioners. And you guys have asked a lot of questions. We feel it's moving too fast. We think you need to slow down the process and let the public have more say. There's lots of questions, but I'm gonna enter into the record some imputable, maybe booba things that we'd like you to think about. Jefferson County Farm Bureau tries to track land use items that can impact agriculture and available farm ground in Jefferson County. The agenda item and application, 500 pages, has given us concern. Earlier, some Farm Bureau members reached out to us about the letter that was sent by the county to see if they wanted to be included in the new proposed industrial lands. Can you tell us how many were contacted and wanted to be included in this proposal? And they showed that in part of their presentation. Here are our major concerns. 1, this being irrigated farm ground on the plains should be the last lands brought into the boundaries for industrial development. Moving west on the plains should be the last expansion proposed. Oregon statute is clear that agricultural land with prime soils is the last priority for UGB expansion. only to be considered if there is an insufficient amount of land to justify a land need. A local government may not select land that is predominantly made up of prime or unique farm soils as defined by the United States Department of Agriculture, Natural Resources Conservation Service, unless there is an insufficient amount and other land not to satisfy the land need. ORS 197A.285 sub 2 sub C sub E. 2. In the 2012 Central Oregon Large Lot Industrial Land Use Analysis was done and other lands were identified. Why are the lands identified then insufficient to meet the need now? Both the city of Madras and Jefferson County have already identified urban reserves. So they showed you that in their presentation, but they went to the easy cherry picking lands. And I think site 4 would work. The application before you has not shown compliance with the Jefferson County Comprehensive Plan criteria for dual plan amendments. We encourage you to slow the process down and to answer questions that people are asking you today. Sincerely, Nikki Killenberg, Secretary Treasurer. So you've heard, you guys have asked a lot of questions. You look at the people here, and I can tell you, most planning commissions do not have this type of crowd show up. And you had only the applicant in support, you had 3 neutrals, and the rest of these folks probably are going to testify in opposition. So, you know, that's something for you to take in and listen up there and all the questions you were asking. Again, I will reiterate, you need to slow this process down and get some questions answered and let the public actually be part of this process. Thank you.
Next.
My name is Michelle Harley. I own the property at 2520 Northwest Dogwood Lane. It is directly northwest of the proposed change property. I did have a couple questions during this meeting. One of the things I wasn't clear is if we're changing it to LLI, but we're keeping it underwater and farming it, how do we farm industrial property? So, you know, it's not EFU anymore, so how are you gonna farm it? I don't understand how you do that. The other thing is, I looked at the LLI zoning description, and the setback's 25 feet from the road. And that is a 50-acre minimum with 85% developable. So if you have 85% of a 50-acre parcel that can be built, that's very, very large. So, I mean, you already know, you're looking for some really large employers to come here. With my home being basically 100 feet away from this property, so within a couple 100 feet, I could have a warehouse with 45-foot tall walls outside my living room window, which of course, you know, having been there for 20 years makes me really sad. As far as all these employees that are going to be coming into the area, once you have this industry type business there, I imagine you're talking significant employees. There was some discussion about improving dogwood and cherry, but cherry doesn't really make sense if you think about it, because there's the air strip. How are you going to make more out of it besides dogwood and birch to get way out there without using dogwood and birch? I mean, 400 cars a day, that's huge increase compared to what we have right now. It's going to impact our quality of life. It's definitely going to impact our farmers. I mean, I'm really glad Mr. Harris pointed out that ruling, because it's going to be a huge change. And once this goes into place, we're stuck with it. you know, we need to speak up now because once it's zoned large lot, there's nothing we can do. So I'm really hoping that, maybe like she was saying, slow down a little, really think about what you're doing. It's changing the agency claims, negatively in my opinion. Thank you.
Nick, for clarification, I have a commissioner who'd like to ask the person who just spoke a question. Is that appropriate?
Yes.
If you wouldn't mind coming back, someone has a question for you.
Okay, sorry.
No worries. It is nerve-wracking to be up there, I understand.
Commissioner Kendall. Now looking at it, I hear exactly what you're saying, and I understand you. Looking at the maps of the different areas. So that you can have more involvement, which site do you think would be conducive with science?
Honestly, I was not aware of this until I got a letter from you. And I just got the file for the page packet. Coming in tonight, so when I was looking at the software on the screen, I only knew mine was the one that was across the street from you. So I'm not familiar with it and can't really say.
Okay,
Although Mr. Harrison said, I feel like some might be.
okay, if slowing down the process would help those who are opposed to look and review the analysis, would that be?
That'd be huge, yeah, definitely. I just feel like I got the letter probably 3 weeks ago from the city, and then I got one from the county after that. And I started researching like this large lot program, you know, that all of Central Oregon's participating in. And from what I read is, okay, yeah, we need to make these large lots available. It's a program that's going throughout all of Central Oregon. But from what I read is, once that large lot industrial is developed, that then again, you go out again and find more large lot. So my concern is, how much large lot are we gonna have on our farm? It's a concern to me.
Thank you.
Thank you for coming back. So we have another person.
Hey Brad, 3020 Dogwood. First off, it's not a case of not in my backyard. What I see here is a huge disparity between what individuals in this state can do as private property owners because of land use laws we have to live under. To fight like hell to put one house on a piece of farm ground that you intend to farm with your family, as long as you're alive, and then the county can take funding that could have been used better. Right over there. Make that courthouse more functional, more secure. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think that's where the $1.8 million came from, is that correct? It was left over in a grant for the courthouse?
Mr.
Correct
Rath,
me if I'm wrong, please.
Mr. Rath, I work for the city of Madras and I cannot answer that question on behalf of Jefferson County.
Bob, Mr. Rath, himself. Am I wrong?
I'm sorry, so you're gonna have to direct your questions to the commissioners up here. What we can do is after you're done talking, we can ask further questions and see if we can get clarification within the commissioners.
Yeah.
But you can direct all the
Well, I
questions to us.
would like to stand corrected if I am in error. However, I find it a very big disparity that the county can take property, change the zoning with the use of the urban growth boundary, and yet a private property owner can't get done what he wants done. Thank you.
Thank you. All right, do you have another person to testify? Would the applicant like to present any rebuttal testimony?
Oh, all right. That was.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks. Regarding North Unit's, comments, we have, the county has no issues regarding the proposed changes being offered for the annexation agreement.
What about the canal? Is that gonna be a problem for what we're doing here?
I don't think so. I mean, they have an easement, so I mean, it's not like we're
I
gonna.
know, but I'm just saying, the canal through the center of the property and.
No, it's all along the parcel line.
It's bisects the property, yes.
So that seems very problematic. While they're renting the property.
I think that's where they're talking about the potential relocating.
And if they're relocating on the property or on somebody else.
We work with, well, we'd have to have permission to go to someone else's property, but, you know.
Seems a little problematic.
Yeah, I don't think that's gonna be a problem though for the county to comply with what North Unit wants.
Or piping, it depends on what the proposed use is on the property, and we're all just assuming now. But yeah, I think if whatever developer would propose would definitely have to be approved by the.
And then I guess my last, I think, attempt to answer Mr. Rass's question regarding the savings. So we had a budget approved for the project and the project came under budget. It's not that we removed state grants for courthouse, all that savings. We had to work with the court on security. We developed a set of plans, had those approved by the state, and thank goodness through good project management, we came under budget. And so that's where that we talk about the courthouse savings. And then from a bridge loan style thing, you can see in the document, they actually went and borrowed the extra $2.5 billion before we got the grant, because we needed to proceed before the old courthouse failed. So that's where you get where we have substantial savings that we're able to put to the construction.
Part of that, one of the property purchases, one of the first came from economic development. Out of the video poker.
All the rebuttal we have.
Thank you. Does staff wish to provide anything further?
City staff does not.
Good county staff asked a question of Mr. Harris and Ms. Killingworth. Could I have them come back up and just ask 2 questions?
I believe so, yes.
Okay. And I apologize for not getting it earlier when you were both testifying.
Ms. Killingsworth, for the record, Jefferson County Farm Bureau. Before you ask the question, I'm going to point out when Judge Bailey answered the question by Jess Ramsden, that he needed to address the question, appear at the mic for the record and identify himself. It's the procedure, not answer the way he did. That's to me a huge help. Yes.
So staff has heard your testimony and correct me if I'm wrong, but what I'm hearing and I'm seeing in this request is City of Madras is trying to provide an economic opportunity in terms of industrial development. And it would suggest that my understanding is Agency Plains is a very important economic farming area. And in turn, it's also an economic machine. And so what I'm seeing here are like 2 economic areas potentially, being adjacent to each other, and my question is. Do you see or could you potentially see some kind of business activity locating on this industrial land that would support that northern area of Agency Plains kind of activity? Is there some kind of business that the community could use to be located in close proximity? That would be an industrial use that could be located at that location?
Bill, I haven't discovered. So I'm Gary Harris, pardon me, 7,000 Northwest Indian Drive. I'm glad you brought us up here because I had a couple more questions. Can't the process you guys are going through be applicant driven versus setting the zone today and waiting for somebody to show up? Was the purpose of making this zone change now, giving the county the ability to call it an enterprise zone and get financing to enhance some developer to come there?
I really believe it does make the difference between somebody locating in it. The expectation in terms of land use being 90 days prior to development or more, depending on how much appeal you get, does kill deals. I think Mr. Stark would probably testify to that. I've literally seen it many times.
As a realist, I realize that there's a lot of industrial uses that can take place on that land that would be compatible with agriculture. I just hate to see it move towards the best farmland we've got. And I'm quite upset that we gave up on hippie Joe's land.
And that leads into my second question. My second question to you would be, would you be more comfortable if the county were to commit to Clackamas Drive and Dogwood being, that's it forever, kind of the comprehensive plan?
I'm gonna answer that. Vicky Killingsworth, Jefferson County Farm Bureau. As you know, you cannot bind one commission to another commission down the road. You can put in restrictions, legal restrictions, but then that sort of defeats what you're talking about. You're talking about an industry in the air. You have no industry. You're just saying we need 200 acres, even though you could do it with 100 acres when you go through their presentation. So until you have an industry, you don't know. You're just asking for, we want this, we hope we get the power in 10 years, we hope we get this infrastructure in 10 years, we hope blah, blah, blah. And then we're going to find an applicant. If you have an applicant come in 2 years, your power isn't gonna be there. What infrastructure is not gonna be there? Your transportation. I mean, the commissioners asked some very good questions. So to ask us what industry would benefit agriculture, it's not gonna be a data center. It's not gonna be, I mean, it would have to be an agriculture processing center. We already have COSI. We have Helena. I mean, we have the fertilizer companies and that infrastructure we have based up there, that Pratt and Wilbur Ellis and all that is up there in that zone already. So, it's a hard question for us to ask in the future. And in reality, on restrictions, unless it's in a deed title, you can't bind anybody, any commission to that. You can't bind a county commissioner to it versus a county planning commission. So I don't know if I answered your question, but to me, you're asking for us to give you an answer, and right now you're talking sky. You're not talking reality, which is what we have problems with. We're more, like Mr. Harris said, applicant driven. So you can say, okay, we're gonna get this 200 acres. And when they talk about 70% of the population in Jefferson County works out of county. Well, that's because right now, Jefferson County, if you start at Culver, go to Metolius, look at all the housing, we are a bedroom community to Bend and Redmond. And that's where the industry goes. You look at the maps that Mr. Stark put up in the industries. That's the stuff you guys as commissioners need to sit down, look at thoroughly and say, oh, what does all this mean? Before you make a major decision. They're asking you to make decision after decision tonight. If I was sitting there, I would say, I cannot make this decision because I need to go back and look at these materials. that were presented tonight and figure out what are we talking about and what questions as commissioners we asked. What else do we need to know? That's my spiel, and it may not be answered to Mr. Steinbeck's question, but you opened the can of worms when you asked me.
Sure, could I respond a little? Would that be okay, Chair? So when you do development, there's a lot of unknowns until the land gets appropriately zoned for the type of development that may come on. And I'll give you, for example, when you talk about infrastructure and the planning involved, a lot of it is forecasted. And for instance, when you talk about power's out there, and what you'll find is the way power moves around. If you have a facility that uses a megawatt of power, and then that facility closes down, when that building goes to reopen, that power may or may not be there. So they live in a very fluid world. And so when they produce it, they have to use it. And so what I'm saying is until land use is designated for it, they don't know how to plan for it to bring the power to the location. So it's really nebulous, hard to get your hands around it. And it never is planned, they never develop the infrastructure ahead of the zoning showing what could be built there. No facility does it. Water doesn't, sewer doesn't, roads don't, power doesn't. It's always the other way around. Planning always leads, the zoning always leads the discussion. And so that's why it works like it does.
Can I respond, Commissioner? Agriculture is an industry. Whether anybody really wants to, anybody who's a farmer, we know we're an industry. And Mr. Harris talked about community impact tests. That's where you look at all the impacts that can impact agriculture that's out there on the plains. And the canals talked about, well, we can pipe it or we can do it. Well, they have an easement, so that should take care of it. So there's still a lot of questions. And then the lady who testified about her home and 400 trips a day, you know, this is, it's just moving too fast. I guess if this was the hearing, but to ask you to do hearing tonight and take all these major votes, it's this vote, this vote, this vote. To me, it's overwhelming. And I probably have a better understanding of land use than some people in this room. And I find it pretty overwhelming. And if I find it overwhelming, I'm sure some of you as commissioners, even though you're volunteers and trying to do your best job, I could tell by the questions asked, you had a lot of concerns. And yes, agriculture is a business, but one thing we do our infrastructure probably first when we go to develop. I'm not going to go plant mint if I don't have a place to sell the mint or have a mint tub or mint harvest. I'm not going to raise cattle if I don't have fences to keep the cattle or working corrals and stuff. So we live in a different world, even though we are a business. And we are, whether people want to realize it, we are the economic force, probably in Jefferson County, have been for years. And it doesn't mean we're opposed to development. And site 4 would be probably a good site. But that's what this hearing is about, for you guys to listen to people, ask questions, and decide whether you feel comfortable taking votes tonight. Thank you.
Thank you to both of you. I do also want to reiterate for people in attendance that this is not the first time either of these commissions have seen some of this material. So when it comes to this type of hearing, we have had other meetings where we talked about this in a group to gather information. So while we asked questions tonight, this is not the first time that we have seen this information, just so that we know that as well.
Can I make one more comment?
Mhm.
An additional comment for me here. Mr. Stark, and I don't know him, and I'm hard of hearing, so I couldn't hear his presentation. But if you look at all of the quests for large scale industrial that took place in Central Oregon, there was only one that was 200 acres. Why don't you guys start small and pick a 100-acre site? It's on Birch Lane. It's on that gravel pit, Willow Creek Canyon area that's away from agriculture, is away from housing, and get a start on the Hippie Joe land. She says it's divided, I don't know how it's divided. It's got a ditch through the middle of it. But that doesn't stop industry from using that site. So to me, there's a lot more preferred sites, in my opinion, than going to Clackamas to going to Dogwood Lane at this time. Thank you.
Thank you.
I have a question, I'm sorry. This is going to Mr. Harry.
Yeah, the question for me.
I have a lot of questions, I'm sorry. I'm not too familiar with farming and do you know how many acres are agency?
25,000, I think, north of town.
25,000. Okay, and the proposed expansion is roughly 200 acres. Okay. Which is percentage what I'm maybe Asian, but I'm not good at math really. But what is do you know what percentage that is of the acreage up there?
It's less than 1%.
Less than 1%. And one of the things, when you're growing your crop or planting, how do you know what to plant? What, I mean, is it just every year I plant the same thing, or is it, yeah, I heard contracts? Okay,
Commissioner Reynolds,
yes,
it depends on what you raise. I raise livestock,
okay,
but if you raise, carrot seed, Jefferson County is, the largest producer of hybrid carrot seed in the world. So every time you go eat a baby carrot or a carrot, probably 80% of the time it will be the seed to grow that carrot. We don't grow the carrot, we grow the seed, came from this county. So you look at the markets, you look at the climate, in Jefferson County's climate, it has, maybe not this year, but normally cool nights, warm days, and that's why we're called the seed county. In the early days, they raised clover seed. Then they went to peppermint oil, and then China developed synthetic oil, destroyed the market, and wilt came in as a disease. We still raise most of the mint leaf tea in Jefferson County, but because of the drought, mint takes a lot of water. So everybody is trying to raise what they can, and a lot of people are leasing more land and taking water off fallow land, which is land not growing anything, so they can have enough water to get their high value crops through. Does that help you any?
a little bit, I mean, I understand, you know, that you plant what sells, right? And so basically what's selling is what's in demand.
It's it's because of our area. We're a very unique area in Oregon and actually in the United States. So that affords us certain crops we can raise that other areas can't raise. So it's sort of like that, but we're specialized. So, you know, when you ask what we can do for a factory or an industry thing, well, like I mentioned before, we have COSI, we have Helena, we have Prado, we have Borealis, and we have the Tractor Supply places, because we are the hub that all the other counties, Brook and Deschutes, depend upon. So we are that hub, but every time you take farm ground out of production, where are we gonna go get that same quality farm ground? It's not like we can go get it. You have to have a stable land base, so you have a stable infrastructure for agriculture to continue. And years ago, our Farm Bureau sort of cut a deal with the county commission. They wouldn't move further toward dog. And here we are back again. And I think Mr. Harris alluded to that in his testimony. So, you know, that's one reason we're here. The deal was to go east. East does not have the same qualities as the plains. So that's why we always encourage everything to go east. You have a sewer system out there. I mean, go east, you're gonna have housing out there, go east. So that's sort of where we're at.
Okay. Thank you for the information.
Okay. All right. So this is for the City of Madras Commission. We have 3 options. We can either close the hearing now and deliberate towards a decision. We can close the hearing and defer deliberation to a time and date certain. Or we can continue the public hearing to a time and date certain.
Chair,
Yes.
in an attempt to facilitate that decision. Couple things first. One, we need to just double check on Zoom that everyone's had the opportunity to provide
sorry.
comment.
Okay.
And so if you just afford them that
Does
opportunity.
anyone on Zoom want to submit testimony? Anyone raise their hand?
No.
Okay. All
Okay,
right.
thank you, Chair, for affording that opportunity. And then secondly, as you consider what action you may want to take this evening, there has been a request to continue or keep the record open for 14 days. And so if you wanted to continue the date, continue the public hearing to a date and time certain, for 14 days, staff would recommend that you continue the hearing to October 9th, 6:30 p.m. here at City Hall. And if you would allow the record to be open 14 more days. Did I miss anything here?
Well, just to clarify, because there was a request to keep the record open, we are at least going to keep the record open for at least a period, meaning we are not going to deliberate tonight. The real question for the commission is how long do they want to keep the record open? Whether that's just for written testimony, or is there a need to hear more oral testimony? And then at what point are we coming back for deliberations?
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. So commissioners, it sounds like we do need to leave the record open and or leave the hearing open. So the October 9th date is a possibility. I need some feedback from you all about whether you want to leave it open the record for written and oral or one or the other.
Question, if we leave it open and have it on the 9th, will it be another public hearing where people can come and give oral testimony as well as written?
Yes.
That's the question. If you need to hear more oral testimony, then the entire hearing is being continued to that date. If it's just an additional period for anybody that wants to submit additional written comment, you could set a date for that. And then a date to come back, which would just be for deliberations, no additional testimony.
I think I heard Commissioner Kendall mention that she'd like to leave the record open for oral. What about you, Commissioner Reynolds?
I would like the entire hearing open for oral or written.
Okay, so I would need a motion from either one of you.
Okay, I make a motion to keep the entire hearing open to basically to come back at a further date of October 9th at 6:30.
So I have a first,
I second the motion.
all in favor say aye. Aye. No opposed. So for the city, it is remaining open. We will now move on to the county commission.
Thank you. Bill, so do we need to make that, that we concur with?
Yes.
Okay.
The motion to concur with the signature.
So Commissioner,
Chair, you certainly could choose to deliberate in decide differently.
Okay,
We're make sure we're clear on that. You're not allowed to deliberate tonight on a legitimate question because the record needs to remain open. You can come to a different conclusion than the city planning commission came to, which is for the county purposes. You could decide to limit it to only written testimony. Pragmatically, it doesn't make much sense to do that because we're gonna be back to it for the city planning commission, so the most logical thing to do would make a parallel motion as the city did.
thank you, David. Commissioners, do you have any comment? Or are we ready to vote towards, we can continue the hearing, along with the city, to October 9th at 6:30. We can do written testimony only, or we can leave it open completely.
I'm good, we should leave the narrative open.
And Tanya, do you have a conflict of any sort? Okay. So- I don't think so. Okay.
I wanted to the motion is clear that hearing will be again here at City Hall, 6:30 p.m. We'll obviously need to renotice that. Think before I can renotice that, we should continue the hearing. Actually, that's not true. The notice went out, it's incumbent on you to be here tonight. The one that we continue. The city council and county commission hearings that have been scheduled for me to be rescheduled. So, I want to see the motion for 6:30 October 9th here at City Hall.
And do I have someone who's making that formal motion?
I move the county commissioners continue the public hearing, both written and oral. And then we meet again on October 9th at 6:30 in the city council chambers.
Thank you. Do I have a second? All right, Tanya, can we do a voice vote or do you need to take? Okay, all those in favor, say aye. Opposed? Hearing none, I say.
Lori's on Zoom.
Oh, Lori,
Aye.
thank you. Okay, the motion passes. Thank you. With that, I'll go back to you.
Okay, so with that being said, the hearing is not officially closed, but we are done talking about it for today.
Yeah.
Okay. So, people in the audience, you now know October 9th is the new date. If you have the opportunity to speak with staff regarding their issues or submitting written testimony, this is your time. So make sure that you use this time to follow up. You'll be appropriate to get those questions and things sorted out. And I believe that the county is dismissed.
That's right. Do you want to take maybe a 5 or 10 minute break and reconvene?
Sure. Okay, we'll take a 5-minute recess.
For the record, the county adjourns our portion of the meeting.
Thank you.
Thank you all for being here this evening.
It's just got a whole lot more
Madras meeting, so if I can everyone have to take their seats or take the conversation out to the hallway, please. All right. City of Madras is about to start their meeting.
Hey, Jeff.
It's now one time, 8:52. And we are reconvening the City of Madras meeting for today. We are going to open the public hearing in regards to City of Madras large lot industrial zone change proposal, file number ZC 25-1. Nick, do I need to read the statement for that?
Yes, you do.
Oh, fun, all right. All right. So this is the time and place set for planning file number ZC 24-1. The hearing is now called to order. The hearing will proceed as follows. Staff will present the staff report. Applicant will present its application and supporting evidence. Any interested persons will then be provided the opportunity to present testimony or evidence in support that is neutral or that is in opposition. Applicant, as the party bearing the burden of proof, will then be afforded an opportunity to present rebuttal testimony. Staff will provide closing comments. Any party may request that the written record remain open to respond to testimony presented at the hearing. At the conclusion of this hearing, the hearing body may close the public hearing and deliberate, close this hearing and defer deliberations toward the decision at a date and time certain, continue the public hearing at a date and time certain. All testimony, argument, and evidence must be directed to the applicable criteria or any other approval criteria you believe to be applicable. Matters unrelated to the application are not pertinent to the planning commission's decision in these proceedings. Failure on the part of any person to raise an issue of sufficient specificity to afford the planning commission and parties to this proceeding an opportunity to respond to the issue precludes appeals to the city council and land use board of appeals on that issue. Failure of the applicant to raise constitutional or other issues relating to the conditions of approval with sufficient specificity to allow the local government or its designee to respond to the issue precludes an action for damages in circuit court. Commissioners must disclose any ex parte contacts, including site visits, biases, or conflicts of interest. Does any commissioner have anything to disclose? Commissioner Kendall, none. Commissioner Urban, none. Does any party wish to challenge any member of the hearings body based on ex parte contacts, biases, or conflicts? All right, seeing none. Staff will now deliver its report.
Thank you, Chair Ryan. In light of the prior public hearing, staff's going to recommend that you continue the public hearing this evening to October 9th at 6:30 p.m. here at City Hall. That said, we still would like to afford anyone to provide any comments this evening. So if you would like to proceed through your agenda as noted there for public comments. And then at the end, during your deliberations, take formal action to continue the hearing to the date and time certain. Mike?
Is there an applicant testimony on this one? Seeing none. We will now provide public testimony. When you testify, please state your name and address for the record. All testimony shall be directed to the planning commission and not to the applicant, staff, or other members of the audience. If you have a question for another party, please direct your question to the planning commission chair, and the chair will determine whether a response from the other party is appropriate. Please keep your testimony concise and relevant to the issues before us this evening. It is perfectly acceptable and encouraged to indicate that you agree with the points made by another party instead of reiterating the point. Testimony will be received in the following order: persons speaking in support, persons who wish to provide neutral testimony, and persons who wish to provide opposition to testimony. Finally, we will hear rebuttal from the applicant. Do we have anyone here who would like to testify in support of applications? Any neutral testimony? Any opponent testimony? All right. Seeing.
Let's double check anyone.
Oh, yes, Zoom. Anyone raise your little cute little hand arm on Zoom? All right, seeing none. We can to respond to Nick's request. So someone would make that motion.
Motion that we keep or move the hearing to October 9th and keep the hearing open October 9th to the public to the 6:30 p.m.
at City Hall.
at City Hall.
I second the motion.
I have a first and a second. All those in favor? Aye. None opposed. Hearing is moved to October 9th or continue until October 9th. All right, we get to move on to our third agenda item. That was way quicker than the first agenda item. All right, City of Madras Large Lot Industrial Annexation Proposal File Number AX 24-1. We are opening the public hearing on this one. And I get to read another fun thing. Whew, you guys should spot the things I say incorrectly, tell me after. All right, this is the time and place set for hearing on planning file number AX 24-1. The hearing is now called to order. The hearing will proceed as follows. Staff will present the staff report. Applicant will present his application and supporting evidence. Any interested persons will then be provided the opportunity to present testimony or evidence in support that is neutral or that is in opposition. Applicant, as the party bearing the burden of proof, will then be afforded an opportunity to present rebuttal testimony. Staff will provide closing comments. Any party may request that the written record remain open to respond to testimony presented at the hearing. At the conclusion of the hearing, the planning commission may close the public hearing and deliberate towards the decision, close the public hearing and defer deliberations towards the decision at a date and time certain, or continue the public hearing at a date and time certain. All testimony, argument, and evidence must be directed to the applicable criteria or any other approval criteria you believe to be applicable. Matters unrelated to the application are not pertinent to the planning commission's decision in these proceedings. Failure on the part of any person to raise an issue that is not specific enough to afford the planning commission and parties to this proceeding an opportunity to respond to the issue precludes appeal to the city council and land use board of appeals on that issue. Failure of the applicant to raise constitutional or other issues relating to conditions of approval with sufficient relevance to allow the local government or its designee to respond to the issue precludes an action for damages in circuit court. Commissioners must disclose any ex parte contacts, including site visits, biases, or conflicts of interest. Does any commissioner have anything to disclose?
Commissioner Kendall, I have none.
Commissioner Reynolds, none.
Commissioner Urban, I have none. Does any party wish to challenge any member of the hearings body based on ex parte contacts, biases, or conflicts? Seeing none, we will move on to the staff report.
Thank you, Chair. Because of the two prior hearings related to the comprehensive plan amendment and the zone change have been continued to a date time certain on October 9th at 6:30 p.m. at City Hall. Staff would also recommend that this public hearing be continued to that same date and time, and that you provide the same opportunity for public comments during the public hearing this evening.
Make a motion to continue.
No.
Do the public comment part
Public
first.
comments.
Okay, sorry. Okay. We will now hear from the applicant. No applicant is present. We will now receive public testimony. When you testify, please state your name and address for the record. All testimony shall be directed to the planning commission and not to the applicant, staff, or other members of the audience. If you have a question for another party, please direct your question to the planning commission chair, and the chair will determine whether response from other party is appropriate. Please keep your testimony concise and relevant to the issues before us this evening. It is perfectly acceptable and encouraged to indicate that you agree with the points made by another party instead of reiterating the point. Testimony will be received in the following order: person speaking in support of the application, persons who wish to provide neutral testimony, and persons who wish to provide opposition testimony. Finally, we will hear rebuttal from the applicant. Is there anyone here who would like to testify in support of the applicant? Anyone providing neutral? Anyone providing opposition testimony? Anyone on Zoom? Seeing none, we can now move to Cliff's favorite part.
I make a quick, Commissioner Reynolds, I make a motion to continue the public hearing to a future date of October 9th, 6:30 p.m. at City Hall.
Commissioner Kendall, a second. I have a first and a second. All those in favor say aye. 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 None opposed. Hearing is continued. All right. Number 4. I don't have to read the long statement for this one. City of Madras request for development code text amendments to master plan density requirements, file number TA 24-1. We are opening a public hearing for this. We only need to declare conflicts of interest. Does any commissioner have any actual economic conflict of interest to disclose?
Commissioner Kendall, I have none.
Commissioner Reynolds, I have none.
Commissioner Urban, I have none. Okay, staff reports.
All right. Before you is a proposed amendment to the City of Madras Development Code, Chapter 1855. This request to amend the code comes from our efforts to work with developers to develop their land. Current city code requirements, 1855 requires properties over 10 acres in size to be master planned. Part of that requirement is that they need to for residential uses, they need to meet the underlying zone density requirements for that development. And so the density meaning the number of dwelling units per gross acre. City staff has been working with Bean Foundation to develop a new master plan for the Yarrow master plan and property that the Bean Foundation owns. As well as some of the city's property that we have land transaction agreements with them. One of the things that we've run up against is this density requirement. In particular, the developer or property owner, I should say, is concerned that meeting the 7 units per acre gross density of gross acres is going to be difficult because of the slope of the land. And that the cost for leveling the land or adjusting the land to meet that density far exceeds the actual value of the land they can sell as a result of creating the lots. So the really policy question here is for the planning commission, eventually the city council, is for properties that exceed 10% slope, do you want to allow them for master plan development to develop at a lower density? I can tell your staff that this solution is candidly not ideal, but it works for the developer. And this is a pretty large development. I think this is something the city needs, so we need to try to find ways to work with them. But the larger concern that I have is that really the city needs to look more comprehensively at our density requirements in our development code and figure out how we implement this more effectively. We've got to also need to look at the zoning of the land. Because the land that the Bean Foundation owned is zone R3, which has your smallest minimum lot size for single family detached. It's also some of the most sloped property in the city. On the other hand, we have some really some land that's much flatter. It has a very consistent slope over 100 acres that has some of our lowest density zoning. So we need to really evaluate where we can get higher density housing on flatter land. And also look at how we are going to implement and require developers to meet the residential density standards. That's a bigger project, okay? And so my proposal would be in the short term, amend the code to accommodate this need. Whether it may not be exactly what the city wants or maybe in the best interest of the entire community. I think most of the land that can be developed with a lot of the steep land is owned by the Bean Foundation. So really it does help them, but I also think we need to step back separately and take a more comprehensive look at this. So I share this with you because it's not ideal, but it's a solution, but I also want to recommend to the commission that we also take a priority look, and we're making efforts to do that. I'm currently working with a couple of consultants to figure out who may be best to help us through those kind of policy related decisions. So that's really the proposal. It's kind of a surgical amendment. Here, it's really related to kind of one property or one developer. From there, I'll just answer any questions you may have.
So the number that you came up with as far as what that adjusted density should be, how was that number determined?
It's so 7 dwelling units per gross acres, the minimum density for the R3 zone. For the R1 and R2 zone, your gross density is 4 dwelling units per acre. So we're suggesting that in this case, if you have land over 10% slope, then you could develop to 4 units. So develop to your lowest density in your residential zones.
So at least that would be somewhat consistent. It's either A or B,
Yes.
not like Z, X, and.
Yeah, it's not arbitrary. They still need to meet the 4 dwelling units per acre.
Okay, thank you.
My question, Mr. Kendall, is that, if we approve this, which seems like that's a temporary solution for this particular, and then we, review the overall zoning in the bigger picture, how will that affect this decision? Because this decision is just for one area, one developer, pretty much. And then if we change it for the other, will this stand for them, or will then the new overall taking larger areas into consideration for slopes and whatnot? Will that change this? I mean, our new decision will change this one. But they may not be done with that development by then. So how do we deal with that?
Good question. In my mind, it comes down to when the property owners start their master plan and what standards are in place at that time. Secondly, it depends upon when they act upon that master plan. It's down to a vested right issue. Vested rights is a legal principle that really starts to articulate when someone gets a permit, when they act on that permit, how long can they rely upon that permit based on other circumstances, including code changes. So, in other words, if I get a permit, how long can I rely upon that permit to obtain any subsequent permits, like a building permit? Okay. And so, we have talked with the city attorney about this, Garrett. And, you know, I think if the master plan is submitted and approved, and they move forward with, you know, engineering and or development, they're gonna have a vested right. I think that, they would be able to rely on that and build out their development.
So there's a fail safe for them, in a sense.
It is. I also think that,
You know, we want to work with them, like you said.
yeah, but I also think that candidly, I don't believe their master plan is being conceived right now in a way that long term is gonna meet their needs. And so I think what's likely gonna happen in the future is they're gonna propose a lot of larger lots because they think that that's what the market is and that's what the topography is gonna demand, and then probably 10-15 years from now, they're probably gonna come back in and amend the master plan. Because it needs to be amended, they wanna do something different. And at that point in time, they're gonna need to meet the city standards.
The new one, okay.
So this is not a game, this is not a bait switch, this is all open. So, you know, they can get their master plan, they can utilize their vested rights and develop that, but. You know, I would also say to them, looking at it, if you wanna change it, you're also gonna have to meet the city standards that are in place at that time. We can't, there's no hiding behind that. I don't know what the standards are gonna be in the future, right?
Right.
So. Yeah, but this allows them to submit their master plan. and meet your requirement of the city's requirements, plain face. You know, factually, they can respond to this and meet the criteria. And give them a master plan and move forward with development they have interests in the short term.
That's fine. Thank you.
Commissioner Reynolds, I have a question for staff again. So in a master plan community, you can have multiple residential designations, R1, R2, R3, correct? And now you're saying because of slope, you can also change those to from was it, yeah, R1 and R, anyways, the designation to be changed depending on slope. So if a person comes in, buys up 4 lots, doesn't get them combined, doesn't ask for a lot line adjustment, and, you know, builds a house continuously on these 4 lots, but it's on a steep slope, technically they can put another, because of the density and it's over 40, so they put a bunch of little houses in around them.
Yes,
Okay.
but I also want to be clear. You can change the zoning through the master planning process. It needs to be accompanied with the zone change request. Right? You just don't get to come in and rezone things. They're not suggesting rezoning the land. Right? They're not.
Okay.
So they're gonna keep the zoning as the proposal as I generally understand it today, has not been submitted. But as we've discussed it, the R3 zoning would still apply. What they're talking about is changing the criteria by which you approve the master plan. And then part of the standards by which you review that for. So right now, your master plan says you need to have a master plan, they get 7 units, 7 dwelling units per gross acre. Right? The underlying zoning requirements, in this case, R3 zone. They're not changing the zone. Now separately, I interpreted the second component of your question differently. If someone buys 3 or 4 lots and consolidates them and builds one house on it, that is perfectly fine. They can do that. It's not something the city ideally would like, but that is fine. They could also build the adjacent properties to whatever is allowed in the zones at that time. So the surrounding properties of that consolidated properties could have single family detached. They could have 1 to 4 unit dwelling units. They could have townhomes, any of the uses that are allowed in that zone at the time that that proposal was submitted.
Okay, and I bring this up because is there, somebody does that, they build single family dwellings, is there a maximum square footage as of right now that they can build those single family dwellings? Consistent to like, let's say the primary residence is 1,800 square feet. They have enough setbacks from, and they meet all the criteria to build on the remainder of the land that they have. And is there a maximum of what they can build on the remainder of the land? That's our square footage.
Currently, there's only a maximum lot coverage requirement.
Okay.
Of 50%. So floor area, that doesn't count the actual floor space. So, you know, the size of your foundation, if you will. If you have a 2-story home, we're not counting all the square footage of that 2-story home. It's just the footprint of the building. That can't exceed 50% of the lot area.
Because in my mind, I'm just seeing somebody buying up a bunch of lots and putting in a cottage cluster. With a main house maybe in the middle of them or something to that effect, and their cottage cluster being, you know, the remaining square footage of square.
Understand the concern. I actually don't think that's probably likely just based on the development code and the size of lots that are being proposed. They'd have to consolidate some lots, right?
Yeah.
But your cottage clusters, you need some land. And can you do a cottage on a 7,500 square foot lot? Maybe. That's gonna be really challenging, right? You're more likely gonna do a 1 to 4 unit development, like what we usually call a 2 to 4 plex on that. So, the way our code's set up right now is, on any legal lot of record, in any of the 3 residential zones, you can build up to 4 dwelling units on it, attached or detached, but you still have to meet all the development standards, right? So it's not a no, it's yes, but you need to meet all these standards. So, I think your concern is generally good, I just don't think practically speaking it would happen. Under the code at this time.
Any public testimony at this time? Please state your name and your address into the microphone.
My name is Allie Larry, 383 Southeast Rodeo Lane, Madras. I'm Reed. I've been up since 3. My son had surgery this morning. With my brain shutting down past 9. Thank you for the opportunity to testify today. My name is Allie Larry, and I'm speaking on behalf of, as a board member for the Bean Foundation, also the property owner, in support of Code Amendment TA 241. By the way of background, I have extensive experience working full-time in the real estate industry since 2005. Many include projects that aim to meet growing housing demand in challenging and diverse environments. The Bean Foundation, a local nonprofit, has been consistently supporting this community since the 80s and is committed to supporting sustainable, practical housing solutions. I shouldn't have typed this in a day when my mind was going better. The proposed code amendments are crucial as they allow for reduced density in residential master plan sites where the majority of the land consists of steeper slopes, specifically those with a 10% grade or more. On constrained sites like a hillside area, flexibility is essential. Without the ability to adapt to both site conditions and market demands, many projects will either fail or move forward and be unviable. Between 2005 and 2012, I saw firsthand how higher density needed to be adjusted to market conditions and demands specific to that area, creating lower density lots. Constrained lots, like hillside lots with the city's highest residential density, need flexibility because the projects cannot be entitled and built in a way that aligns with market conditions, and they never happen or they'll fail. The amendments of the additional option for large-scale projects ensure development is feasible, particularly when it comes to aligning with market shifts like financing, interest rates, material costs, demand of the market, who's out there buying and what they're building at that time. While developers will naturally seek to maximize density, these changes help balance the unique challenges of sites with practicalities of development, ultimately supporting a broader range of housing options that are crucial for the city's needs. Thank you for your time, and I urge you and recommend you to approve the code amendments. Thank you.
Thank you.
Selena Green, 2825 South Adams Drive, Madras. I just had a quick question. Can I ask a question of Nick? Is that appropriate? So Nick, you said that if there's potentially looking at some zone adjustments, do you have a time frame of what that might look like?
I don't know if I said that, maybe you misunderstood it, so
Okay,
maybe
can you
explain.
clarify?
Yeah, so what I'm suggesting is that the planning commission approved the proposed amendments this evening. Within short order, we need to start working on some larger code adjustments to our master plan requirements. I don't know how long that's gonna take. Could take 3 months, could take 6 months. We've got one meeting scheduled for, or planned for November and December, and then we get into January for 2 meetings a month, so. I don't know the complexity of it, if there's additional analysis, all that sort of stuff, could take maybe longer, but. It would be a major miracle if they get to the city council in probably 3 months.
Thank you for clarifying.
Is there anyone online? Okay, anyone else? All right, do you have any further staff comments?
Did you know?
Okay. So now we can deliberate in regards to this motion. And then we can either recommend approval, modify it, deny, or continue. So we can talk about it first. If you have questions for Nick or just wanna talk about what you think.
In my experience, these slopes, they tend to have, better views, you know, so. I don't know, that's fine, I mean, gives more people a view. So, people pay for that view. And whether it's Madras or anywhere else, they will pay for. They will pay for a view. And they just. Don't know, that's fine, something is really. Or not that's something. One of the arguments was, it's not cost productive to the builder. You know. I've heard that from a lot of builders, it's not, you know, it's not conducive to their. Making a profit. That's. I mean, you. Yeah, and they understand that. You know, 4 per acre, or, you know. Yeah. But most of these slopes are. Reasonably sloped. They're hard to get to, but they provide. Something that other places don't. I finally have to other than that. Very cheap. Right. I'm gonna mention that we can
All right, I have a first and a second. All of those in favor say aye. Aye. Any opposed? Nope. All right, motion carries. All right, so. Now we get to item number 5, I guess. Any other items to discuss?
Yes, a couple pieces of housekeeping. I don't believe we have a plan commission meeting scheduled for October 2nd. That's good. Because you're gonna have one on the 9th. I do think you're gonna have one on the 16th. I'll need to confirm that. So,
So we'll have
yeah, but
2 meetings.
yeah, you have 2 meetings, one regular in October. So in that regard, check your email. Please respond and confirm your availability for that. And then also, just a small request. If we're emailing you the packet, we're asking you to confirm your availability. Could you please respond via email with your availability? Because we only have 4 planning commissioners, so technically only one can be done, otherwise we don't have a quorum. I don't mean to be difficult here, but I also don't want you to come down to City Hall when we don't have a quorum, right? So if you guys could just look at that and help us with that small little bit, I would really appreciate that.
I have a question. Is it possible to meet before October 9th and have like a work session regarding this whole thing with the annexation that we opened the hearing?
No.
Okay.
It's unfortunately not. It's, you know, this is where these legal proceedings go, so.
So you can meet with Nick individually.
That's
If you
correct.
have questions.
Yeah. And to that end, I would ask that you not talk with your fellow commissioners about it. Even the county commissioners. Yeah, to be overtly clear, perhaps a pain. Commissioner Kendall isn't to call Commissioner Irvine and discuss my meeting with Commissioner Kendall or any other one, anyway. Yes.
Yeah, there are some rules about public meetings that we need to adhere to as far as conversation. So if you meet with Nick, if Nick decides to share anything to the whole group, you can choose to do that.
again, this is the ex parte contact component of your early, ethics disclosures in your public hearing. So ex parte contact, that is a Latin term for contact outside of the public hearing, right? And the reason we don't want that is because members of the audience, whoever's participating in this hearing, wants to make sure that everything that's said in the hearing or provided in the staff report or in the record, the file, is everything that's been disclosed and they know everything. So everyone has an equal playing field in terms of the knowledge and information. So if the planning commissioner talks to another planning commissioner about this and they disclose something else or learn something else, and that isn't shared, well, that's a problem. Now, you can cure that, but that's not, we don't want to be in the situation where you gotta cure a problem, right? So the legal advice is always call staff, right? We can talk one-on-one. I have all the time in the world, we make all the time in the world for each of you to meet with me, but, yeah.
It's different than our other kind of
What-
meetings where we can have our sessions.
That's exactly right, because this is a quasi judicial hearing. And the hearing you just conducted was legislative, right? Legislative is generally policy oriented, it's, and so they're,
Sorry, my brain is not going to that legal
that,
arena.
no, I am really appreciate the question, really appreciate the opportunity, just a quick coach on this. So that's why we can have those discussions in other cases where, in this case, we can't, because it's quasi judicial. Yeah.
Thank you for clarifying. What you were afraid of.
So Nick, let's say we're at Safeway and one of the people who testified tonight starts talking with us. What do you recommend we do?
At the beginning of the next public hearing, on October 9th, if that happens, then you need to disclose that, and Garrett's gonna tell me yes or no, you're wrong. Wrong, but ideally, you would say, hey, listen, I'm a planning commissioner, I need to remain objective and unbiased. You know, please share your comments at the public hearing. Of course, we're all gonna be kind and respectful, someone may continue to share something with you, and if they do, you need to disclose that at the beginning of the hearing.
Great. Is that you concur?
Yeah, that's exactly right. Be as polite as you can to shut down the conversation sooner rather than later, saying it's a pending application for which we need to discuss it at a public hearing. That's not gonna stop them necessarily, so you'll have to disclose that somebody tried to communicate with you, and I said, I didn't want to discuss it, but this is what the person continued to say.
And also refer that to.
Absolutely.
Okay, I know that on the 16th, my son has a cross country meet in Estacada, so I most likely will not be able to make it on the 16th.
That should be fine. There is a degree question on that, but by the end of the day on Friday, I will email out the planning commission meeting schedule as I know it today, so you guys can plan accordingly.
That's great. Anything else? All right, so I think it's time to go home.
Nice job, thank you.
Yes, it is 9:20. I don't know. 9, sure. That clock is wrong, isn't it? 9:29, and we close this meeting. Thank you.
I